I go ahead and go to that next slide. We'll start. Thanks for joining us today for Disability Etiquette, Disability Awareness Training, Changing the Perception of Disability. And I want to welcome your team here today, as well as Anna, who's stepped in to help out today. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Anna.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Warbach. I am a white woman with chin length brown hair. Use pronouns she, her, and hers. And I am a business relations consultant in Clinton, Eaton, and Ingham counties. So kind of the middle part of the state. Work with Craig, and who had asked me so nicely on Monday if I could help out with this. And I said, absolutely, I would love to present with you. So I'm looking forward to presenting this topic today. It's something near and dear to my heart. So I'm more than happy to jump in.
Thank you, Anna. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm Craig Saunders. I'm the business relations consultant with MRS up in Northern Michigan, covering the counties of Northern Michigan and a little bit in the UP right now. But we're here today to provide some information from our expertise, a little bit on disability awareness. We provide this service to a lot of our business partners and a lot of our community partners in Michigan, helping to bring awareness about the subject of disability and working with people with disabilities. So go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll get started. The first slide is basically a question of why are we here? We want to share some knowledge, with our audience about disability, about the subject of disability, but we also want to help people to feel more comfortable about working with somebody who has a disability. And this training today can help with that comfort. It can help with making your interactions more effective. We're going to start by looking at some perceptions about disability. And we're also going to talk about the legal definition and then do a brief overview of disabilities. We're also going to ask for some feedback. We've got some polls today that we're going to blend in with some other information regarding disability etiquette, some do's and don'ts. Our plan is to just help everybody to gain more insight into the subject of disability, including myths and misperceptions along the way. And then finally, when we end today, we're going to talk a little bit about the subject of reasonable accommodations and how they can impact employment. So next slide. So I may not have warned everyone, but I usually do these presentations and ask for interaction. So be ready. I'll be asking questions. We do have the chat feature, which everyone can use to respond. So this first slide is it's a perception slide. I would like some people to put in the chat tell me what you see in this picture. Woman in a sax. Oh, Laura, you've done this one before. Howard the Duck. That's a new one.
They both jumped out at me. I see them at the same time.
Oh, that's great. I see a witch. I see a face. Okay. All right. Lots of great answers. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So yes, you could see many different things in this picture. The two most common are the face of a woman and a person playing the saxophone. But the other answers too, none of them are wrong. It's all about perception. The funny thing is, though, if you perceive the picture a certain way, you're able to actually see the other ideas that people put into the chat just because of the awareness that's brought about. Some people will look at the picture and only see a woman, but then after focusing, you've learned a little bit, you become more aware. So you see the picture of the face. So we want to talk a little bit more about this perception. So the first question, we're going to talk more about what you're aware of is, what is your picture of a disability? So I would like people to just put in maybe some keywords that come to mind when you think of the subject of disability, or you think of somebody with a disability. So go ahead and put some verbiage in the chat and let me know what you think when you first hear the word disability. Emotional strength. A person who has special needs. Barrier, special, barriers. Okay, I see the word barrier a lot. Unable to perform specific tasks, a person with a disability, not a disabled person. Nice, thank you. Different able, thank you. All right. So a lot of times when people hear the word disability, they might think of is a physical disability, you know, someone in a wheelchair, or maybe someone using a cane. A lot of times then people may think about things that people with disability can't do. You know, maybe they can't do a particular job or certain tasks of a job. So thank you for sharing. I've got a lot of great ideas and great words there. Go ahead and click on the next question for me, Anna. Moving on to the next question. So as we think about the subject of disability, and it's the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how prevalent it is in our society. But maybe you could think of someone you know, or it may be yourself, who may have been told at one point that you couldn't do something. Even with people without disabilities have been told, you know, that you can't do something. So think of a situation where someone was pretty adamant about letting you know that you can't do that, and share with me. And to help a little bit, I'll kick off. I started playing hockey when I was 5 years old, and I've been playing for about 40 years now, or more. And people tell me I shouldn't play anymore. And I almost agree with them every day. Like today, this morning was tough. I played last night. So, you know, starting to catch up with me. But so, all right, reach the highest cupboard. There's a good example. Start my own business. Okay. That's a great one. I've seen that one a few times. So oftentimes people with disabilities are told similar things like this, advanced math classes. All right. Thank you for sharing. They're told that you can't do certain things, and it's because the people are looking at the disability first and not necessarily the abilities. A lot of times it's just an assumption. It's based on limited interaction with persons with disabilities. It's based on maybe something they might have seen on TV. It's not always based on the facts. Sometimes it's a bias, and sometimes it's a fear, you know, for someone who may have a disability. And I see some more great answers. Thank you. Joining the sorority, comprehend reading material. Thank you for sharing. Go ahead and click on that third question. So the final question on this slide is, how many more times does a person with a disability have to interview to obtain a job when compared to an individual without disability? Maybe we could throw some guesses in there. How many more times do you think it is? 42. That's a big number, Alicia. Thank you. 10 times 3, 8, 5, 3, 3. A lot of threes. Try to get back to this so I can see who said 10. Holly, you got it right. A lot of times people will think it might only be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times more, but it is actually 10 times more interviews for a person with a disability to land a job. So, let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So speaking of how disability is prevalent in our society, when you look at this slide, it talks a lot about the impact on all of us. It's pretty prevalent. In the United States, it's approximately 1 in 4 people have some type of disability. 1 in 4 adults have some type of disability. And actually, when we look at numbers in Michigan, it's a little higher. 29% is the recorded data. And this data comes from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. A couple other points I want to make on this slide is you see the 2 stats from 2020. You can see there's a higher percentage of persons with disability who are working part-time employment versus those who do not have a disability. And then another big stat change in 2020 compared to 2019 was the amount of persons with a disability that reported they were employed. It dropped from 19.3 to 17.9. And that may not seem like much of a drop, but it's when you look at the numbers, and 1 in 4 people in Michigan, 1 in 3 people in Michigan with a disability, that's pretty huge. Let's go to the next slide, please. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the ADA If you look at the timeline on the right, you can see there was a lot of civil rights movements, a lot of rights for different populations, looking to bring equality in our nation. And the ones that really kicked in for persons with disabilities were the Americans with Disability Act and the Amendments Act. So that was in 1990 was when the first act was introduced. And then in 2008, there were some adjustments. And the purpose of the adjustments, a lot of it was to make it so it wasn't easy for government entities or companies to define disability. It opened up the realm a little bit, as opposed to being a very definite disability or definite definition. It opened it up a little bit so people can have a little leeway, because it was really impacting persons with disabilities who were found that you don't have a disability because you don't meet the exact definition. So they lightened it up a little bit in terms of what met the definition. When we look at the ADA, the law, it talks about three major points that are associated with the Americans with Disability Act. The first one is the definition of a disability. It can be shown that a person has a physical or mental health disability if it substantially limits one or more major life activities. So when we say major life activities, can someone give me some examples of what they think a major life activity might be? And as we're getting at, I see Lisa's question about, do you think there could be unreported disabilities? Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we call visible and invisible disabilities here shortly, but there's definitely unreported. All right, so some of the examples I'm getting are walking, cooking, playing sports, working, hearing, working, employment and education, getting out of bed in the morning. Exactly. It's having children. Yep, it's all those things that we do in our lives to get through each day. From the examples that were stated to things like eating, sleeping, seeing, hearing, walking, breathing. It's all the things we do to get through a day. So thank you for sharing. The next part of the ADA law talks about it including people who have a record or a history of an impairment, even if they do not currently have a disability. So that the law protects people who may have gone through some type of disability, but are no longer dealing with it, but people may perceive them as still having a disability. So it's an example would be maybe someone who went through cancer and went through some pretty serious treatment. And at that time, they had a lot of limits to their major life activities. And then now they've gone through the treatment and maybe they're in remission and people really can't tell. Maybe they're aware of it, but you can't tell. Well, that population is protected based on the ADA law from discrimination. So the final piece, and I mentioned the perceived part already, but it includes individuals who do not have a disability, but may be perceived as someone who has a disability. So this could, as an example, I'm going to lay out a situation where a person who's working for an employer and they're involved in a major car accident and have to go through some treatment. And during that treatment, they recover from the treatment and they come back to work. So they come back to work and they apply for a promotion. And because the management is like, well, remember that car accident he was in, and I don't know that he could do the primary tasks of this job. Well, that's discrimination, because there's no reason that the person, if they're applying for the job and they have the abilities to do it, that perception of the management thinking that he can't do it because he went through pretty significant injury is against the rules from ADA, the law from ADA. So one final note I want to mention about the ADA is that it is considered a legal definition versus a medical definition. So medical definitions are more appropriate for agencies like Social Security disability. They have a lot more going into the definition of a disability. But the legal definition is just a protection for those with disabilities against discrimination. Right, next slide. And I apologize for the phone ringing. It always rings when I start talking on presentations. This slide talks about visible and invisible. And we had someone mention about not reported, disabilities are not reported. This is where this comes into play often. Visible disabilities they're visible. You notice them right away. Somebody walking in with a cane, or somebody using a scooter or a prosthesis, or someone in a wheelchair. Invisible are the ones that you can't see. And it could be anything, from hard of hearing, hearing difficulties. It could be learning disabilities. And I'm going to share a list with more here shortly, but they're invisible and they're not seen by the general public. You don't notice it. Could be congestive heart failure. It could be things that impact the person, but maybe not all the time. Maybe that's not, maybe sometimes it's someone who might be in remission, or someone who's receiving treatment for, let's say, a mental health concern or mental health diagnosis. So there's treatments that help, that make it so you can't tell somebody has a disability. And oftentimes the person with that disability doesn't necessarily identify as having a disability. So it's often unreported. So thank you for bringing that up. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the list I was talking about. And as you look at the list, these are what are considered invisible disabilities. It's pretty extensive. As a disclaimer, I will say, go ahead and click that button, Anna, that this is not an all-inclusive list. There are many things that are not on this list that could still be considered an invisible disability if it impacts one or more major life activities. So as you look at this list, maybe you know someone who has one of these invisible disabilities, or maybe you may have one yourself. And again, a lot of times people won't identify as having a disability even with these diagnoses. So it's not necessarily reported as a disability. So when we look at this list, though, we think about the relationship employees have with their employer. Oftentimes, it's hard for an employer to bring up the subject of disability. They may not feel comfortable having the conversation about the subject of disability, or the person with the disability is not comfortable with letting their employer know that they have a disability or that they're having difficulties on the job. And that's one of the main focuses of our outreach when we're doing these disability awareness trainings to our business partners, is we offer it not only to their business, to the HRs and the managers, but we offer it to their employees, because it helps everyone to see the impact of disability, and it helps bring awareness, and hopefully starts, easing that conversation between employee and employer when it comes to the subject of disability. We'll go over to the next slide, Anna.
All right.
Read the question, and I'll throw the poll up.
All right. Okay. Finally, I get a chance to pipe up here, Craig. All right. So I'm going to start off with a question. So when a person avoids eye contact with you in a social setting, it's usually a good sign that they are evasive or hiding something. Is that true or false?
And we're going to launch a poll. So go ahead and answer in the poll. And there's our results.
Okay, that's right. Avoidance of making or sustaining eye contact could have many different meanings, and could be cultural considerations. It could be, it might not have anything to do with, it could have nothing to do with, the disability. It could just be, anyway, let me just get back to my script. There might not be any reason to ignore completely the cues of body language, but it is dangerous. The point is, it's dangerous to rely on them too much. So, all right, so the next, Craig, was there anything else that you wanted to pipe in there? Just go ahead.
No, I'm good. Go ahead and go.
All
to the
right,
next
okay.
slide. Yep.
So I'm going to go into some tips on, in interacting with people with disabilities. So the number one is you want to make sure that you are speaking directly to the person with a disability. If they might have a sign language interpreter or companion, and you want to make sure that you're engaging the conversation with the person with a disability and not with the companion. The companion or interpreter is there just to support and assist, but they are not the actual individual who is engaging or in the interaction or the conversation. So you want to be respectful of the person with disability by making sure you're making your eye contact and engaging with him or her. And it's okay to ask the person if they need assistance, but make sure that you're asking the person and not the person who is there to assist them. So you want to treat the person as if you are speaking to them or interacting with them. All right, so greetings. Now this is something that's changed quite a bit in the past few years. So, prior to COVID, we used to talk about shaking hands with people as a common way to interact with a person or to greet somebody. But post-COVID, this is looking much different. But we want to emphasize, the main thing that we want to emphasize here is being respectful to people in our greetings and our interactions. So what do they look like now? You might wave, nod your head, do air hugs. I don't know if anybody's been doing those. But it might be a good idea to let the person with the disability take the lead when you're interacting with them or when you're greeting with them. Some people with disabilities may have difficulty understanding or accepting the new normal. If I say that another time or hear it another time, I swear I might go a little bit out of my mind. Not today, but anyways, but what if somebody wants to shake hands or give a hug? How do you navigate that situation? We all have different comfort levels with how close we are getting to people or who we're interacting with. I might not want to come into an office full of people. And if I do, maybe I do want to wear a mask. So, it's just making sure that you're, like I said, being respectful. And, if somebody is struggling with like the whole no contact greetings, you gotta feel comfortable of mentioning the current public health and safety protocols and procedures. You can offer alternative ways to greet and talk about your own personal boundaries. I was just in a training yesterday with 40 or so other people, and I'm okay with going into a room full of people without a mask sometimes, but there were numerous people there who were still wearing their masks, and that's okay. That's their prerogative. They have, everybody has their right in what their comfort level is and their own personal safety. So it's about being, it's about what you're comfortable with, and like I mentioned before, being respectful. So the thing is, regardless of what the greeting is, if it's a air high five or a virtual handshake or an air hug, we just need to make sure that we are being respectful and feeling comfortable with discussing our own personal boundaries and safety protocols, and offering different alternative methods. So one thing you want to do is say what you see. I don't know if anybody noticed when I introduced myself, I said, give a bit of a verbal description of my appearance. You want to make sure that when you're interacting with people who have a visual disability, give them information verbally. Identify to yourself and others who may be with you when you're meeting with someone who has a visual disability. You may become, you want to remember that you may become the eyes for that individual. or if you have somebody coming into your space for a meeting, you want to make sure that you introduce yourself or anybody else, and provide a layout of the room, a layout of the space that you're entering. So that way they can navigate through any obstacles that they may encounter. You also want to make sure that it's free of things that people can trip over. You want to make sure that you're preventing any falls or trips, etc., and allow that person and everybody else to navigate the area safely. Okay, here's another true or false question. So if an individual asks for help in filling out paperwork, you should assist them without interacting or without inquiring about the nature of the disability.
All right, the answers are coming in. Just be a second.
Mhm.
All right, here comes your results.
And the result is false. It is absolutely okay to ask a person how you can best help them. I guess that's the biggest thing is, what is the assistance that they need. Another thing when you are offering assistance, or if you're offering assistance, you want to make sure, first of all, that the offer is accepted, and make sure you listen to the instructions that they provide. Don't be offended if a person doesn't want to accept assistance. Sometimes a person has a disability, has figured out a way to navigate their environment safely, and doesn't need your help. In fact, sometimes you could be getting in the way of that person if you do try and place yourself between, or you try to open the door for them. They may have already figured out the best way to get that door open. So just, so if they say no, respect that. Another thing that you need to make sure you do is treat adults as adults. You want to address people with disabilities by their first names only when you're extending that same familiarity to everybody, to others. Don't patronize people in a wheelchair by patting them on the head or shoulder. Sometimes it's natural for people to want to say, call them sweetie, hun, or honey, and instead of Mr. Brown or Mr. Smith. But you want to remove assumptions regarding intellectual and physical disabilities and never treat somebody with a disability as a child or beneath you. You want to speak to the person as if you would speak to any other adult. And if you are unsure of the person's ability to understand what you are saying, use simple language, but don't use baby talk. And this is applicable to someone with or without a disability. Next thing you want to think about too is respect people's personal space. Don't lean on or hang on somebody's wheelchair. Touching somebody's wheelchair is really invasive. People with disabilities treat their wheelchairs as extensions of their bodies. So it's not okay for you to just go and hang your purse on somebody's wheelchair. As tempting as it might be to get it out of your way, don't do that. Please don't do that. This also applies to people with service animals. You don't want to distract an animal from their job without the owner's permission.
Yep, and I'll just add, I'll take over now, Anna.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of got on my soapbox. Dang it.
That's okay.
Go ahead, Craig.
When it comes to service animals, it's okay to ask for permission, but don't be offended if the person says no, because again, the animal is working. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to pull up another poll.
Sure thing.
If someone has hearing loss, it means they will need an interpreter for the interview, onboarding, and to do their job. Let me get this poll. Poll is launched. So go ahead and put your answers in. All right, and our results, majority picked false, and false is the correct answer. Oftentimes when you're working with somebody with hearing loss, oftentimes they don't use American Sign Language. I mean, that's a different language, and it's primarily used by those who are deaf. So for hearing loss, a lot of times there may be other forms of accommodations that can be used when you're working with somebody who has hearing loss. It could be different ways of communicating, using email, using texting, written communication. There's other ways that can be used for a person who is looking to do the job, who may have hearing loss. Now, if we're talking about somebody who is deaf, who is using American Sign Language interpreter, it may be a great idea to bring in an interpreter for the interview to help ensure that the communication between the interviewer and the interviewee is 100% correct, to make sure that everything the point is getting across the table. But that doesn't mean that the person is going to need an interpreter every day. Again, they can use those other communication methods that I mentioned when working with someone with hearing loss. Go ahead and click down to the next slide, please. So on the subject of hard of hearing, it takes a person an average of 7 years before they will admit that they have hearing loss and will seek help to obtain hearing aids. That's the average. So I want to ask the crowd a question here after I lay out some more facts. The WHO, the World Health Organization, not the pinball wizard WHO, but they estimate that by 2050, that over 900 million people will have some type of disabling hearing loss. That's 1 in 10 of their estimate, 1 in 10 of people. So I just want to get some feedback why you think that is. Why is this becoming more of an issue? Why are we having more hearing loss? Casey, you win the prize for the number one answer. I see a lot more coming through with the earbuds. Yep, earbuds is the number one answer. Cell phones, loud music, yep, all those are impacting our hearing, but the earbuds is the number one. There's also cases where people have received some type of treatment. People live longer now, so they receive treatment that helps with one thing, let's say a cancer treatment, but it may cure the cancer, but it may, impact their hearing. We've had some cases where that's happened, and the person that it happened to said, "Well, I'd rather be alive and not be able to hear than the other, than the opposite, not being here." So I also see not protecting with loud sounds. That's another big problem. Thank you, Jennifer. So thank you everyone for sharing. When you look at the screen, you see some probably familiar faces. We have, Huey Lewis. He's actually deaf in his right ear. And then he was diagnosed with Meniere's disease back in 2018, I believe. Whoopi Goldberg, she wears 2 hearing aids. Rob Lowe, he's deaf in 1 ear since he was born. And his deafness came from mumps. Halle Berry has 80% hearing loss in her left ear. And Jodie Foster has worn hearing aids for years. But in the next slide, please. So let's talk more about communication, especially when we're working with someone who may have hard of hearing. Don't assume that you're heard or understood. Always use another way of communicating. A good example is if you're giving someone direction verbally, follow up with an email, follow up with a text. Those will allow the communication to be 100% correct. Use other input when conversing, and it could help. An example might be referencing a document that you used in a previous meeting as you're speaking about the subject. Get someone's attention before speaking. Give them a wave, call them to you, go up to them, tap them on the shoulder. It's okay to get their attention to ensure that they're able to get as much of the communication in if we're going to have a verbal conversation. Another great way is to ask the person what's the best way to facilitate the conversation. They'll be able to tell you from their experience is what's the best way for them to communicate. It could be as simple as, well, I can't talk to you on this factory floor, but can we go into the break room to have this conversation? Don't be afraid to rephrase something that you said. If it seems like someone's not understanding or not hearing, there's certain sounds that certain people with hearing loss can't hear. So try restating it in a different way. Another important thing to remember is to never shout. To speak in a normal tone. Shouting actually changes the way the words look coming out of your mouth. And I'll tell you that lip reading is not a perfect skill. And even those that have been deaf or hard of hearing for years only understand about 40% of what they're able to see from lip reading. They use part of that skill, but they do need other cues to understand the conversation. But be patient to respond, or be patient if the person responds slowly. It may take a little longer to process the information. They're getting some visually, they're getting some audibly, and they're putting that all together before they're able to make the response. And sometimes they're missing pieces, so they're trying to fill in the blanks. So give them a chance to be able to respond. And then, as I mentioned before about getting a person's attention, it's just important to also remember, just talk directly to the person. Try not to be doing other things like chewing on your pen or eating food while you're having that conversation. Just try to have it face to face. Next slide, please. Listen and be patient. This slide is referring to persons who may have some difficulty with speaking. At times, someone may have a stutter, or there may be some type of disability that creates a difficulty. Cerebral palsy is one good example for a person to be able to speak. So just give the person the time they need to get what they're trying to say out. If you don't understand, it's okay to ask questions or ask the person to say it in a different way. It's okay to ask short questions that can get you a yes or no answer or a nod of the head. The most important thing to remember when working with somebody who has trouble with speech is to not pretend like you understood if you did. Always make sure that you are getting the correct message, and don't be afraid to ask for another way to communicate. It could be another written form, email, text, or handwritten, or just restating what they said. The person who has the problem with the speech knows they have the problem with the speech. They've dealt with it most of their lives. They understand that sometimes people don't understand them, and it's okay to ask, to increase that communication by asking to do so in a different way. Next slide, please. Most importantly, just relax. Everyone, they're people. Everyone's people. We're all people. We're all here. Don't get overwhelmed by just because someone has a disability and you know it. Just relax, engage normally. Just be normal. Be yourself. It's okay to say things, as in this slide, it talks about using common expressions that may be relatable to someone's disability. A good example I like to share regarding this slide. We used to do a lot of work with previous Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley, and he would work with State Supreme Court Justice Richard Bernstein. And Justice Bernstein is blind, and he worked with us many times on some disability awareness events in the month of October in the past. And Calley and Bernstein met a lot. They worked together a lot on different projects related to the subject of disability and its awareness. And one day Calley went in for a meeting and went into Justice Bernstein's office, and he walked up to him and said, he called him Richard because he can. And he says, "Richard, it's good to see you." And after he said it, he immediately thought, "Oh, was that rude? Why did I say that?" he's probably thinking, what a jerk. Why did he say good to see you when he knows I'm blind, and so they had their meeting and they got done, and Callie afterwards said, Justice Bernstein, I just want to say, I'm sorry. When I walked in, I said, it's good to see you. I hope I didn't offend you. And Justice Bernstein said, no, don't worry about it. He says, I use that expression all the time. So it's okay. They're common expressions that can be used by everyone. Next slide. We're going to go back to Anna, and I'll get ready for the poll.
Yes. So we've got another true or false question. Developing reasonable accommodations for mental illnesses is difficult for employers because of the general lack of understanding concerning disabilities.
And the poll is launched.
Okay. And looks like we've got a bunch of answers in. Craig, when do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm going to share right now.
All right.
Looks like a majority of the answers came in true.
All right. Well, guess what? Did it come through? It's actually false. You want to remember that, hold on. Sorry. You want to remember that each person is an individual. So there are a lot of strategies for have been developed for accommodating people with disabilities, and that, that includes mental illness. So, just like a lot of times we say, if you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. If you've met one person with mental illness, you've met one person with mental illness. There are a lot of different ways to that disability impacts each person. So we are really individuals. So let's see here, so there's lots of different ways that have been developed to accommodate people. And so really each accommodation is based on the unique attributes of that individual. And including people with mental illness. Also think about things like number 1 and number 2 prescribed medications that are covered by health insurance are those that treat anxiety and depression. So it's really, it's really prevalent. It's very common. And this is really more true since COVID. And I see a hand up, Laura.
Do you find that, I guess the way I read the question, do you find that maybe some employers, I'm curious, like with you guys working with employers, do you find that there's the general or comments of, they don't think that really is a disability? Oh, that's not really a disability, that shouldn't be a big deal. I guess that's kind of how I was looking at the question. Maybe it's their willingness to accept that things
that something like anxiety or depression.
Right. They may be like, yeah, oh, they should be able to work through that, or that shouldn't be a disability. We don't have to accommodate that.
Right. Well,
and you experience that.
You know what? It's interesting that you say that because, as a person who experiences anxiety myself, I may or may not need an accommodation depending on the day. A lot of times I actually don't need any type of accommodation to do my job. So we don't have anything set in stone that any type of, accommodation that I've met or made with my employer, anything that's on paper or anything like that. What I will do sometimes is say, hey, but guess what? I have anxiety and I'm feeling really anxious today. So I'm going to be like full disclosure with you people. I'm a little bit nervous today. So just bear with me because I might stumble over my words a little bit, but you know what? That's the Anna that you're getting today. And doesn't mean that I'm any less capable than the Anna that got out of bed yesterday or will get out of the bed tomorrow. But you know what? Some days I'm really on with these things. Some days I'm off. Some days I stumble over my words. Some days I'm like, you would think that I've been doing this for like 20 years, and not just the year and a few months that I have. So anyways, I see another hand up. Looks like Macy, do you have something to say?
Oh, you're on mute,
You're on mute, Macy.
or
Oh.
maybe you weren't,
Maybe.
but it's not working.
We see your lips moving, but we can't hear what you got to say. Craig, is there a way you can put it in the chat?
Possibly, or unless you have another audio form, maybe it's a headphone thing not working audio wise.
She's saying just a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just had to unplug the headphones. I guess I was kind of confused too, or not confused, but from my experience and the people that I know, a lot of times the employers are not as friendly with it, especially like being told like she said, like, oh, that's not actually a disability, especially with like the non-physical disabilities. And a lot of times in my experience and people that I've known too, the employer says, well, you can't perform the job duties of your function with that, like, you know, that kind of along the, oh, sorry, I'm all caught up here. Along those lines, or like fear of retaliation. Cause like, you know, they say the law protects you, but like in all honesty, I've known a lot of people with mental health disabilities who couldn't get any accommodations at work because their workplace just didn't recognize it or chose not to recognize it. You know, like, do you think just with the advancement of like, not like knowledge and like having people talk about it, it gets better? Because like you want to remain optimistic that that will get better, but let's be honest, we're dealing with humans, and especially with certain HRs, it's kind of like, well, the law is there to protect you, but also like they're always going to choose to protect the employer first over the employee, kind of thing. Is, you know, like what, like for people who are scared of those things, like what recommendations do you have to tell them? Because a lot of times I know like some people too are like, well, I have a disability, and then they'll try to get the accommodation. Then they're like, well, you don't have a strong enough of a disability. So they're like denied the accommodation.
Yeah. And I will share that, reach out to us.
Yeah. Reach out. Yeah.
Because
Okay.
we do a lot of work with businesses, and for this question, the main point on here was talking about employers' lack of knowledge and understanding. And I'll tell
Well,
you right now, HR
and
managers.
that's just where I get it curious too, because
Yeah.
again, the HR manager, you know, we have a great one at our company, but you know,
Yeah.
it's like they're human too. So if they have those biases, even if they've been taught the proper things, I've known a lot of people to get screwed over because you know, the HR person like didn't like them or had beef. And even though there were those like protections with the law against there, so like, do you have tips and tricks for like what to say to people with disabilities, like especially working with like youth, you know, like going like not to discourage them? Because you can tell them as much like, okay, yeah, we'll work with, you know, you can work with the employer and there's those things in place, but a lot of times it doesn't really protect them because the employer is just, you know, ignorant.
Yeah. And that's the problem a lot of times. And
Yeah.
and really, HR managers didn't go to school to learn about disabilities.
Right.
So
They went to
we
school to
don't
learn about HR and business.
Yeah, we don't expect them to be the experts in this case. They have their process, and hopefully they have a process for requesting an accommodation.
Mhm.
We always recommend to persons who are asking for an accommodation to formally request it. If
Okay.
you formally request it, the employer is obligated to start the process of interacting with the person with the disability to have that discussion about developing accommodations. If they're not allowing that to happen, reach out to us. We don't have any, you know, we can't lock people up, you know, we can't punish people. We're all about education. So we'll come out and try to educate that employer.
Mhm.
If that doesn't work, then we have partners through the EEOC
Okay.
who can come in, and they have teeth. You know,
Mhm.
there's
Like,
ways to help. So
One thing that I like to say is like, we're not the accommodation or ADA police. Like we're not here writing tickets or, handing out fines or anything like that.
Mhm.
We're here to consult. We're here to provide information, and we're from the government. We're here to help. But that one went way over people. Anyway, we're just here. We're here to provide assistance. And,
Okay.
if there is reason to get somebody that does have more pull or more authority, so to speak,
Mhm.
if that situation arises, then we would cross that bridge when we come to it.
Okay.
I don't know that I haven't seen it come up, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I've heard about it happening in other areas of the state, but not with anybody that I've come across in my
It's
work.
happened in northern Michigan, and I've been brought in as a resource by the EEOC to educate the employer.
So
Mhm.
basically we do have that option to like reach out to you guys if like we have a client or something and we feel like, you know, they're being mistreated at work or, you
Yep.
know, things like that. Okay.
Oh, for sure.
Yep.
Craig, do you see that other hand?
Yes, Kim, go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to let you know, one, that if it happens with our agency or one of our clients that come in, we do have a process for requesting that. We work with our BSPs, which are our business professionals, to get that information out also to the employer. I think a lot of employers are daunted with what a reasonable accommodation is. You know, they don't realize that it could be simple coming in a few minutes later because of whatever it is, or, you know, staying, you know, there's just so many things that can happen to make a reasonable accommodation. They just think, oh, it's going to cost me money. And there's so many options that don't cost money. So, you know, and that's part of the conversation. It's not just, oh, I need an accommodation. It's like, hey, I need help. This, I think, is what may help me. It's a combination of, yes, you need something. Okay, what do you think you need? How can we help? Not just, oh, I need an accommodation. So you got to kind of have an idea. Do you need a phone rest? Do you need the headphones so you're not putting your arm up, holding the phone in your neck and what have you? It could be almost anything that they can do. And there's so many reasonable things to help somebody.
Yes.
And we can help with that. That's part of my
Yep.
job too.
And we can help with that too, because a lot of times
Yes.
people won't know what they need. So we can come in and do some assessments, but
Yes, exactly. And I think we've called you once for something like that.
yes.
So,
And actually, when we move to our next slide,
Yeah, we'll get into it. And thank you, Kim, Macy, and Laura for bringing up that conversation.
oh, good, this is mine too. Yes.
Yes.
All right, I love talking about this. So according to the Department of Labor, a job accommodation is an adjustment to a job or a work environment that makes it possible for an individual with a disability to perform their job duties. Accommodations could include specialized equipment, modifications of the work environment, adjustments to work schedules or responsibilities. Not all people with disabilities or even all people with the same disability need the same accommodations. Businesses of 15 or more employees must legally provide some type of a reasonable accommodation. So what can
Anna, and sense of time, can we skip to the next one that goes into more examples?
Yeah.
I'm noticing we're getting short on time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Do you want me to just go through the slide and just kind of point out the different things that are showing up on this? Okay. All right. So examples of accommodations might be, providing some type of assistive technology. So it could be, some type of maybe some type of a bigger monitor, adjusting or modifying tests or training materials. It could be making or acquiring or modifying equipment. It could be modifying work schedules, providing readers or interpreters for things. Could be modifying exams or training programs. It could be job restructuring or reassigning an employee. Looks like this employee is seated close to an accessible facility. So it could be that maybe an employee needs to have a workstation that's closer to a restroom or a water fountain where they can refill their water bottle or use the restroom frequently throughout the day. They might need to test their blood sugar throughout the day to monitor diabetes. Could be a lot of things that don't even cost anything. And also most of them cost less than $500. Just want to get that on there.
Great ad. So we have one more poll as we're nearing the end here. And it's a business is required to consider reducing productivity or quality of work requirements as a reasonable accommodation. That poll's been launched. Give it another couple seconds. All right, here comes the results. So the results from your team was false, and that is correct. The answer is false. The employer is never required to reduce quality, reduce work requirements, reduce productivity. I will add, though, that there are times where a person might be returning to work, where you can develop a return to work game plan that has specific dates and times and of production rates. Let's say, as an example, like maybe the first week you're going to meet 50%, maybe the second week you're going to be 75% until you reached full productivity again. And that it's okay to ask for, and sometimes the employer will allow it because it's a great way to get somebody back to work without increasing injuries or issues. All right, next slide. We're going to go quickly through this one as we're nearing the end here. Unreasonable accommodations, again, I mentioned, they don't have to reduce the quality. There are times where a person might ask for an accommodation that may be really expensive or may be hard for an employer to provide. Maybe it revolves around changing the work environment completely. That would be considered an undue hardship. There's also times where there may be more than one accommodation that would work. So the employer has the option of picking one that is least costly and easier to provide. Go to the next slide, please. This is our final slide, basically, of the presentation. Just talks about our agency. It talks about, we have people throughout the state of Michigan, including counselors in just about every county. And then we have our team for the BND. We have some rehab counselors on our team, but we also have occupational therapists on our team. And that's where I was talking about coming in and doing assessments for reasonable accommodation recommendations. That's where most of that comes from, is from our occupational therapy team, because they have the vocational rehab side, but they also have the medical side as the occupational therapists. So, and then the CBSPs, that's us. That's our business services professionals. We go through the same Michigan Works trainings that your business services staff go through, so that we're all working on the same page and working hand in hand. The final mention there is this is vision rehabilitation therapists. We do a lot of work with our partners from Bureau Services for Blind Persons. We can pull them in anytime there may be a need as well. And I said that was the last slide, but the last slide has resources. We will be sharing all this information with your team after the presentation today, as well as the recording. So I just want to say thank you very much for coming today. Thank you for the conversation. We're always here as a member of your team. We're here to work to serve the same customers, the same client customers, the same business customers. You guys won an award for the Michigan Champion Awards this year. That was great. I'll be sure to share the link for that event, which is coming up next week. I'll share that with your team, so that if anyone wants to come and join and see that presentation, that'd be fun. So there were some members of your team that came in and helped us develop a video talking about the work that MRS and Michigan Works have been doing together. So again, I appreciate your time. As always, we're available for questions, and thanks again, and have a great day.
And thanks.
Go ahead, Anna.
Oh, thanks for letting me help out with the presentation today. It was a lot of fun. Great to meet you, some new faces and some that I recognize. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Craig and Anna, for doing this today. We really appreciate it. It's very helpful. And to all staff, as soon as Craig sends me the information, I'll get it out to everybody. And if staff do have some questions from today's presentation, would you prefer that they send them to me and then I can compile and send you one email, or would that be best?
No, it's okay. They can send them right to me
Okay.
Yep, that's fine.
All
I'm
right.
available.
Will do. Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. Oh, there's the last slide. I'm going to stop recording, I guess.